Hi, my name is Rachel Miles, and I am a user researcher and strategist. Something you'll learn about me is that I like to make references, including obscure musical ones. Not to go too far on a tangent, but Daniel Radcliffe, surprise, surprise, can in fact sing and dance. Now, I don't claim to be an expert at all in claiming stakeholder buy in, but it's just something that I've done a little research on and have a little experience with, so I just thought I'd share with what I'd learned. So I'll start off with some common pitfalls and then I'll share some tips I found to get early buy in. The first pitfall is the Hippo. That's right, the Hippo. It's the highest paid person's opinion, the one who usually has final say on decisions and kind of bases their decisions a lot on gut instinct or past knowledge. Now, if you're fortunate enough to work at like a larger company, it's nice when you have a big design organization to combat this, but a lot of times you don't. And so you have to be ready to face these people. It tends to be the person who thinks they know everything because they once did it before elsewhere. Maybe they're a product manager, maybe they're an executive. That's kind of the most common. Maybe they were once a developer and now they're in this other role. And so they think they know what developers in this day want, even though they were a developer 15 years ago. It's a big part of our job to hold them accountable. So those who know the show Parks and Recreation know that Leslie Knope is played by Amy Poehler. And she's very high energy and passionate about what she does. Ron Swanson, her boss, the guy on the left, isn't a bad guy. In fact, he's well loved by the audience and those in his office. But he, like most people, doesn't want to do something without a good reason. Therefore, he'll be a quick naysayer, or at least he was at the beginning of the show. He was usually saying no to things. But then over time, she started wearing him down. And, he started really believing in what she does. So in this scenario, let's be Leslie Nopes to all those naysaying Ron Swansons. So we say we need research, but he'll say, or, our kind of difficult stakeholders will say, yeah, but we already know what the problems are. Or market research has already answered our questions. Or our our product managers have already done interviews and look at analytics. So after running into a lot of different opposition, it's easy to think, well, if they don't want me, I don't want them. Well, you probably could do it without them to an extent, but it's not nearly as effective as just getting their buy-in in the first place. You could go around and, do it behind their backs, but then what's the point of doing research without actually having actionable results later on? So going back to that Parks and Recreation example, as the show progresses, Ron Swanson, the grumpy guy, lets Leslie Knope do more and more of her own thing and even becomes one of her fiercest supporters. It takes time, respect, and a solid relationship. And so in order to gain our stakeholder supports, we have to know them well, to understand what makes them tick, to sell the value of research. We have to show them the value, and so one way is inviting them to usability tests, but it's a small step. Generally speaking, we need to learn when to pick our battles regarding research. So having this early involvement leads to early buy-in. Now this is kind of a long quote, but I liked it because I found it in this book. It's Our Research, and it's a really, really great book. I highly recommend it. We tend to look for some winning argument to get our way. Like through our research, you have to, you can find some quote that the user said, and then instantly your stakeholders will just believe you full faced. But when you're actually working with a stakeholder or a person, it's not on them only, everyone stands to gain. So you're not trying to beat them. You're trying to get them on your side because then your whole entire company is stronger. So who are actually your stakeholders? But kind of ask yourself that. Who are they? You need to find that out before you do anything else. So to get their buy-in, you got to figure out who you're actually trying to reach. So looking at the different people, you have to get the right people. Once you found them out, get the right people and then bring them to the table. So the right people for your team or your product might differ, but I think this is generally applicable. So there's the product management, and they're good to have around because they're aware of the business goals for the product and have a clear understanding of priorities. They can help identify the right audience for the product and the characteristics of study participants. They'll also be leading the development timeline and implementation for any changes that might come up from your research study. Software developers are important because they're usually the ones actually influenced by the results. They'll have to make the changes to the code based off the study findings. You definitely want to have designers there because they're your partners in getting things right. They need to understand the users in the most profound and deep way, and you need their help in making changes to the design. They probably are also the ones providing you with the wireframes, mock-ups, or prototypes you'll be using during the study. If the study is more on the generative discovery side of things, they're just great at capturing critical observations. They'll think of things you hadn't thought to. Now, also, good people to have around are salespeople or customer success managers or other people who are customer facing. Since they're in that close relationship with them, they can understand the audience for a product and shape the participant criteria for a study. They might also be a critical part of helping you recruit. The sooner they're aware of a user study, the better they can prepare themselves to help with recruiting. One thing to note about salespeople is they might be a little hesitant to get you in contact with clients at first because they might be afraid of damaging the relationship with the customer by inviting the possibility of bad feedback. But once you win them over, they're super vital. At a research kickoff, find out these questions. Yes, you could probably figure them out yourself, but getting the answer to the questions from your stakeholders can give you their perspective on it. You almost treat talking with them like a user interview. Take notes. Observe their behavior and body language. A lot of what we do, what I've done in the past is do stakeholder interviews. So just asking them these questions will really, really give you a lot of insight into where they're coming from. And if they're trying to tell you what research method to do, push back because you're the expert. So trying to figure out all of your stakeholders' perspectives and everything, you need to gather all of that data before you can choose the methodology. So matching the methodology to research questions takes some thought, and it's your job, not your stakeholders. One of my mentors gave me this really great advice. When formulating a research plan, ask your stakeholders 3 questions they want answered. It's a bit of a deeper dive than the previous slide of what do you want to know and why. Getting from them 3 questions that they want answered can give you a starting point for your research plan and keeps them involved. Getting these questions is something you can do on a rolling basis, and that changes as your research and priorities change. So knowing their research questions really helps inform your study. Okay, let's talk about meetings. My favorite, not really, but they're sometimes a necessary evil. So let's talk about when you should have them, what you should cover, and who should attend. So researchers plan a study with their stakeholders, then desert them and run the study by themselves, only to come back to stakeholders a month later, expecting them to fix usability problems, change the product roadmaps, or stop the release of a major redesign. So this really rang home for me, and I read it because it's too real. Sometimes you just want to plan a study, run off and do it, and then come back and then expect them to change their plans. But they've been busy, doing all their stuff for a month, and so if they have no idea what you've been doing, how can you expect them to respect the work that you've done? So you got to keep them in the loop. So here are a couple of meetings you might want to consider initiating, like a high-level research planning session with the senior members of your team to gather those strategic insights into the business and technology of the product and company. The senior stakeholders would have the full understanding of what you're trying to get out of the meeting in advance. Then by the end of the meeting, you should have a clear idea of direction and priorities for your research plans. Or at least you'll know who to talk with to get to them. This meeting should happen maybe once a month or a quarter. Then you've got your more tactical research planning and updates with the product manager or engineering team lead. These are less senior people, like a level down. And the goal here is to make sure that on the actual tactical level of getting things done, those key stakeholders know what you do, why, and when. By the end of this meeting, you might have answers to burning day-to-day research-related questions such as, how can we find more study participants? What are the most important parts of the product that require lab evaluation? Blah, blah. This meeting should happen every week or two. And before you launch a study, align on your plan. Everyone has their own style, of course, but this is an example I kind of liked. You should have your title with a combination of the study and the methodology. So like monster.com field study or XYZ phone data entry usability testing. And sometimes it's appropriate to include the target audience for the study in the title. So like this website news page interviews with senior citizens. Okay, have your author and your stakeholders. I like doing this in particular because you have your name, but then you've got their names on the sheet of paper too, which makes it more official. So have your full name, your email address, your stakeholders, and then add their names as well. They've kind of signed it in a way. You have your date, update it whenever you update it. Put the background of the study, describe what led to the study, discuss the short-term history of the project. Be concise, no more than 5 lines. Have your goals. State the high-level reason or reasons for conducting this study. I'd make an effort to phrase it in one sentence. If it doesn't make sense, create a numbered list of very short goal statements. If you have more than 3 or 4 goals, you're either aiming too high or you're repeating yourself. Have your research questions as well. These are the specifics, the core of your plan. Have a numbered list of questions you will answer during the study. It's super important that your stakeholders understand that these are not necessarily questions you will ask the study participants. They are the questions that you want your study to address. And so just as a kind of a good estimate, try to have 7 to 10 questions, preferably around 5. Because they will really help you write the study script, but you don't want to have too many questions either because then it's overambitious for your study. So you construct your script to basically be trying to answer these questions. So you also want a methodology. In an academic environment, this section has one primary goal: to provide as many details as are necessary for another researcher to be able to repeat the exact same study. In practice, the goal of the methodology section is to succinctly inform your stakeholders what is going to happen, for how long, and where. Keyword succinct. Try not to be too detailed, have the right level of detail. With your participants, provide kind of the metadata around the participants you're trying to recruit, like what is their industry, what's their job role, or whatever it is that you're trying to specifically recruit from them. And then it's always good to link to your screener that you'll use to recruit study participants there as well. Have your timeline and your schedule in place. Have that in detail so that then they know, okay, this is how long it's going to take. Detail everything. When you plan to recruit, when you plan to conduct, how long the synthesis will take, all that. And then I like to just in there put my script in there. And this is kind of a living, breathing document, to be honest, but that's just how I do it. So Also, with the last slide, it might seem a little contradictory because that was kind of a lot to throw at you, but keep your studies small. Um, if a usability test, for instance, is not like a big deal, as in, they happen fairly frequently, they feel like they can be a part of it because they understand it. And that's how you turn research into a small deal. And that's a huge way to sell the value of research. It's not a big deal, it's just done all the time. We do research continuously. So many stakeholders convert after experiencing and appreciating the value of such small, continuous usability tests. So also, you might want to, there's some meetings you probably want to consider attending, like weekly product manager meetings where you hear about their strategic discussions with the leadership and the director VP level kind of thing. And then the weekly engineering leadership meetings, because it's a interesting way to just find out like what they're planning to do, learn about the technology and what's important to those leaders. And that way you can understand them. And especially if you don't know the technology very well, you'll start to gain credibility when you start speaking your stakeholders' language. So, last part of my presentation, I'm going to share some general tips with you. Tip number 1, they love the quantitative data. Even if you're doing a qualitative test, think of a few different measures you can use. You can do things like surveys, log analysis, performance data, but having some metrics in there is really good. So, but then I see something like this and I'm like, ugh, panic, math, formulas, geez. This is actually kind of a neat metric. It's called the formula for measuring lostness on a site. L is lostness. N is the number of different pages visited while performing a task. S is the number of pages visited while performing the task, counting revisits to the same page. R is the optimum number of pages that must be visited to complete a task. So this is one, probably just look it up, like look up the measuring lostness. You want to have a score that's closer to 0. 0 is good. Closer to 1 means really lost. So basically 0 good, 1 bad, in the middle. This is clearly in the middle, so it's kind of meh. You don't really want to be in the middle. You want to be as close to 0 as possible. Another tactic, you could just decide on some metric, like the number of size per session. It means someone is clearly frustrated when you hear that. Start tracking the number of size, and that's easy because anyone can count. You can just have somebody who's attending your session, that's their job. Count the number of size. If you have 0, cool. Tip number 2, the playback is not the report. So the presentation itself is not necessarily all of the details. The presentation is kind of what they want to hear. Make sure that you give the presentation with just the information that they want to know, and that's it. Craft a story and then tell them what to do. Give them actions. Tip number 3, if you're doing a written report, which is always a good idea, include an executive summary and then also put that in your presentation in some way. Open up with like what was done, when, where, why, whom. I like this in particular, a list of 3 positive findings and then 3 area opportunities for improvement. I always do that in my presentations as well. Just give them, they like hearing what's good and then hearing where opportunities can arise. Number 4. So if you're doing more than 5 sessions, this is a good idea. But if you're only doing 5, then great. But after 3 to 6 sessions or so, debrief, because the 5 is sort of that magic number where if you do, that's where you get pretty much all of the different opinions, or 80%, something like 80% of the opinions you'll ever get. So if you debrief after a few sessions, it's always a good idea because then you can make sure you're kind of gather the same sort of insights as well. And then you can also like kind of nudge them towards, okay, we might need to be pivoting in a certain direction, or maybe you need to be pivoting your study this way, a certain direction. So anyway, it's just always good to get them together and start discussing the results of a research session. Tip 5. One thing you can do is practice your presentation and present it to your biggest critic. So have you found that when you're giving a presentation, there's someone who's always trying to tear it apart? Well, do they succeed in doing so? Try giving the presentation to them. Makes them feel important and included, and then it makes for better meetings. You're more prepared, and you've already anticipated the hard questions. So tip number 6, anticipate issues. Issues are going to come up from your stakeholders. For example, a stakeholder might say, we learned nothing new from the study after you present your findings. Instead of getting in a rage and wanting to do death metal karaoke, you can say, well, actually, because you touched base with your stakeholders on your research questions. So remember before, in your meeting with them, you went over all of the research questions. So if you document what you think the stakeholders think, or document what the stakeholders think the answer is. So if you've asked them all of these certain questions and they've said an answer, pull up your doc and say, we didn't know that actually, even if you think you did, but be tactful. So documenting these kinds of things before the study is always just kind of good, just to have your back. So tip number 7. So this can be kind of a fun, interactive way, like have them see, hear, and touch findings. So you could have just like a room in a non-pandemic, once we're out of this pandemic kind of scenario, where you actually like print out visuals from your findings, have maybe a laptop where people can listen to things. Just kind of think about how you could make it a little bit more immersive and interactive. Tip number 8. This came from my boss, Eric. He said to always ask your stakeholders for something. People are generally nice and don't say no when you ask for help. If there's something you need to have done, then try asking them if they can make that happen. If it gets them involved, it makes them feel good for being helpful, and it helps you. It's a win-win. So tip number 9, have at least one person in the room to be your cheerleader, to back you up and ask good questions. And also, most importantly though, always have faith in yourself. Because when you believe in yourself, believe that you have the skills for what you're doing because you've been hired for this job for a reason. But all in all, feel free to take or leave anything I said. We're lucky to have such a great community of people out there and a lot of different resources to lean on. So thanks for listening. Feel free to ask some questions in the comments or wherever, or reach out to me. My website's groundedinsights.com, and hope this was helpful.